Welcome to the EUCannaJobs Potcast. We're thrilled to have you with us as we dive into the latest happenings in the European cannabis industry. I'm your host, Andy Mannsfeld, the founder of EUCannaJobs, an initiative dedicated to connecting European cannabis companies with passionate professionals looking to join the field. Today, we have an exciting guest, Alisia Ratliff, a cannabis industry scientist and executive with many years in the industry in both Europe and the USA. Thank you for taking the time to talk again today, Alisia. How have you
Oh,
been?
absolutely. I've been great, Andy. It's so awesome to be here, and I just really appreciate the opportunity to speak on this platform, specifically in Europe as an American working in the European space. So hopefully, my experience can lend some insights to the audience. And obviously, if there's any questions following what we discussed today, I am on LinkedIn, and you can find me, and we can discuss even deeper. But I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks for offering that to people and welcome everyone else who's joining us. Yeah, why don't we just jump in? Why don't you tell me a little bit about your background? Like you mentioned, you're from the US, but you're here in Germany. So how did you get involved in the industry, first of all, and then
Sure.
yeah, from
Yeah,
there?
so interesting story that I will try to keep short as much as possible. So I am a Florida native, and when there was some legalization rumors kind of floating around, that this was something that was kind of kept hush hush in Florida because it was such a conservative state. So I didn't know anything about what was going on in 2016. I was just a hopeful job candidate looking for something new. I was already working in the chemical industry as a lab tech and a project manager. So I was looking for that next step and kind of stumbled upon one of the first licenses in Florida. And honestly, it was an amazing journey to be able to utilize my experience as a chemist, but bring that to a startup that was a true startup where I had to essentially manage construction, procurement of equipment, training everyone, hiring everyone. So it was literally wearing all hats. And so, fast forward from then to now, I saw an opportunity about 3 years ago in the European space for experienced individuals like myself to come over and essentially start to work with some of these startups, which I think are essentially 15, maybe 20 years behind where the US is.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like you said, first of all, in startups and especially I think in cannabis industry, but probably in all industries when you have a lot of startups, everyone's wearing a lot of hats. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of them you probably shouldn't be, but you don't have the money to hire all the people you need, so you
Mm-hmm.
you you figure it out. You have to do
Yes.
it. You have to get through it somehow,
Yes.
and often you're doing things that you're not qualified to be doing, but you learn a lot that way, and you get
100%.
experience, and it's exciting. Kind of scary at times, maybe, but but you get through it.
Definitely. No, definitely. In my experience, I've definitely experienced, I would say, a roller coaster ride in cannabis because, as a traditional scientist, for me, cannabis was something that was quite new. I was never a consumer. I was more so along the lines of someone who had a very negative stigma around cannabis. And for me, it actually opened my eyes doing a bit more research around CBD and understanding the case with Charlotte Figge, listening to Dr. Sanjay Gupta's documentary on weed. So all of these things collectively really started to shift my focus and change my mindset from a scientific perspective about the plant and really what it can do in the pharmaceutical space.
Yeah. I mean, it's sad, like you said, most people or many people still have a negative kind of a stigma or bias against it. Um, and that's changing. Legalization causes that to
Mm-hmm.
change.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen
Mm-hmm.
that in the US, you're starting to see that in Germany, even, and in other countries, that as legalization happens, people start to take a new look at it and say, well, if it's legal, then maybe it isn't so awful. So they actually do,
Right.
like you said, look at Dr. Sanjay Gupta's documentary or other documentaries or
Mm-hmm.
read a little bit more about it. Next thing you know, they're saying, oh, okay,
Mm-hmm.
there are some good things about it. Whether people want to use it recreationally or if it's a medicinal product, either way, it's not as bad as what people said.
Right.
It actually can really help a lot of people, and with all the mental health problems, the chronic
Mm-hmm.
pain issues, PTSD from all the ongoing wars, and the U.S. has been in nonstop
Mm-hmm.
wars forever. There's so many people with PTSD from the military. that, these people can really be benefited from this. So
Yeah.
even if someone's not for the recreational side of it, the medicinal side is, you can't argue against the medicinal side anymore now that we have more and more information.
Oh yes, and thankfully we do, and that's something that I have become much more of a proponent and an advocate whenever I do have the opportunity to speak on a platform about the science when it comes to cannabinoids and our health. That's something that I'm really pushing to really overturn that stigma and to help raise the awareness, because one thing that I'm witnessing here in Europe specifically is a lot of the decision making about cannabis prescriptions are on the doctors and on the pharmacists and on the hospitals. So we have to focus a lot of our energy as professionals in educating them and being able to say, hey, this is why you should start prescribing this as a medication. Because traditionally, from a patient aspect and doctors, they're very used to, ibuprofen as a tablet that comes exactly the same way, no matter who the manufacturer is, and things like this. So I agree with you. That stigma that's there is still very strong, but it is definitely starting to change and shift as laws and things come into place. And then on top of that, when you have success stories, when you're able to speak with patients and say, hey, I'm suffering from blah, blah, blah. I'm actually taking this. It's a traditional medicine, but I have this whole list of side effects that affect my life. I'm
Yeah.
looking for an alternative to where I can have a better quality of life. And this plant will and can do that. So, as an industry, as we start to open up this awareness, it's only going to become more and more popular, more and more commoditized. And as you said, then people can really make the decision on why they're consuming cannabis.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And you have the interesting perspective. I mean, I was actually born in Germany, but grew up in the U.S. and then came back to Germany.
Oh, how
Uh,
ironic.
yeah, actually, I was in Alabama, so right next to Florida. Actually, it's where I
Okay.
first grew up before moving to Colorado. But so I have a similar, background as you do. But I'd be interested to hear what kind of your take is on the difference between how the politicians here in Germany are approaching this versus how it's been approached in the U.S. Like you were mentioning, uh, people looking at it from more scientific,
Mhm.
evidence-based type of approach. But have you noticed the difference?
I have. And it really does, it affects different parts of the business. So for instance, in the US, the market, specifically if we're just talking about the medical market, if we're looking at a state that's medical only, it's
Hmm.
set up in a way to where you can invest and you can make a lot of money in that space, but you're going to have a lot of regulatory challenges. However, those regulatory challenges are kind of like a rolling carpet, if you will, of GXP conditions that you need to meet to be able to supply this market with a product. Versus in Europe, one of the things I've noticed with the programs rolling out here is they have a very traditional stance on safety, and consumer safety is the top. So they are very skeptical about just opening up the floodgates to all of these different manufacturers bringing in products that they have no idea about. So there's a much, I would say, a slower approach here on the European side when it comes to opening up opportunities. But I would say the patient access is essentially you're going to be accessing safer, higher quality products. But then in the US, one thing that I did like about the US was the fact that as a patient, you don't have to depend fully on your doctor to make that decision for you. You actually can discuss these things with your doctor. Your doctor can say, okay, cannabis works for you. That's fine. Here's an amount of milligrams per month that you need to have, blah, blah, blah. And then you go to the dispensary level and you're able to choose what works for you and works for your lifestyle. So I think there's benefits to both sides and both markets, but there are definitely stark differences.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I mean, one of the drawbacks, though, to the American model is, insurance companies never cover it. In
Exactly.
Germany, the insurance companies are required by law to cover it. They're still denying around 50%, whether it's
Yeah.
40 and 60% get denied still, unfortunately. And part of the new laws here in Germany were supposed to hopefully address some of that. Um, we'll see if that ends up working out or not, but at least they were looking at that and hoping to address that. So, but around 50% of people who have a medical, a prescription, are getting their cannabis covered, which I think is great
That's
here.
huge. That's huge, to bear the cost that is so expensive. I mean, we're talking about products that can run you with flour, for good flour, $10 a gram, $12 a gram, depending on where the market is.
Hmm.
You're looking at extracts being triple that price. You're looking
Right.
at concentrates being quadruple that price. So these costs being borne by the patient, it's difficult because there's a lot of patients out there that are suffering from PTSD, from chronic pain, from fibromyalgia, from the multiple sclerosis, all of these different conditions that require an ongoing relief. They're looking for this. And I don't know about you, but as far as disposable income, I can't dedicate $500 to $600 a month on top of everything else to this medication that I need and works for me. So it is quite difficult. And I think that's where a lot of the political landscape comes into the industry, where you have the lobbying from big pharma happening so that it keeps the industry at a certain level, and it keeps patients still kind of on that traditional medicinal train until they can figure out, okay, now we have to shift because pharmacies and insurance companies are now covering this medication. What do we do? So it's interesting. We are playing in a very highly regulatory complexity when it comes to the environment, but we're also playing in a political landscape. I mean, let's get real.
Yep. And I mean, I think a big difference also, though, to Europe is lobbyists don't have nearly as much power here as they do in the U.S.
Yes,
And so, sure, the big industries do have some power, but nothing like in the U.S. And
absolutely.
the insurance companies come in and say, we don't want to be paying for all this cannabis.
Hmm.
Yet, I guarantee you, if they did a cost analysis, they would be saving a ton of money because, if someone's using it for chronic pain,
Hmm.
getting cannabis is a lot cheaper than all these synthetic opiates of
Yes.
which these people are taking, and they end up with tons of side effects from them,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
also leads to medical costs.
Hmm.
Or these people who are having seizures that are uncontrollable end up in the hospital again and again and again. All of a sudden, they have much fewer seizures. That's
Hmm.
saving a ton of money for these hospitals. Or the
Absolutely.
PTSD patients, who
Yes.
been over drinking or doing other recreational drugs and hurting their health, and they're smoking too many cigarettes, and
Hmm.
they're doing who knows all kinds of things, because
Yeah.
they're self-treating. And it's not just for PTSD, all types of mental health conditions where they're self-treating. And a common thing is, people self-treat with alcohol because
Yeah.
when you're blitzed, you don't feel the pain, but
Right.
then, you have all these negative health consequences from it, which cost a ton of money down the road.
Hmm.
So if insurance companies were to be honest and do a true cost and analysis of it, they would come out and say, let's pay for this cannabis because it's saving us money. Big pharma,
Absolutely.
of course, just doesn't like it because big pharma
Right.
say, no, 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 we need them to buy these pills. But
Exactly.
insurance companies, I'm, I haven't done the analysis, so I can't say for 100%, but I feel completely confident that the insurance companies will save money through cannabis.
Oh yeah. And I wonder too if that's like on the horizon, because we're starting to see a lot of these governments look at the decriminalization of cannabis and looking at the cost that's borne by an economy when they have to penalize and actually go about executing on these laws that are antiquated essentially. So I see a big shift happening there amongst what's going on in the States. I know here in Germany there's things going on, Switzerland, Malta, there's plenty of countries that are really falling in line to start to decriminalize because they're noticing, oh my goodness, we spend millions a year on prosecuting these small minor offenses when we could be saving that and actually
Right.
taxing an industry that the people want and getting that money in. So I would say that the insurance company conversation and the reimbursements for health, I think that's probably on the horizon. That's going to be the next conversation.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, it'd be an interesting one to see happen in the U.S. Like,
Hmm.
we said, excuse me, it's already happening here in Germany anyway, the
Hmm.
reimbursement. Um, but like you said, the prohibition doesn't work from an ethical, moral standpoint. Who is the government or anyone else to tell someone what they can and can't do with their body anyway?
Hmm.
Um, Especially when you let them drink and smoke cigarettes and do whatever else, eat too
Exactly.
much sugar and eat fast food and not exercise. I mean,
Hmm.
people can be unhealthy all they want. So why are you going to tell them they can't smoke a natural plant that grows outdoors?
Sure.
You know,
Sure.
but I mean, the costs, like you said, are astronomical. I mean, it's not in the millions; it's in the billions.
Yeah.
But the problem in the U.S. is you've got privatized prison systems.
Yep.
So some of the biggest contributors to the anti-cannabis laws in the U.S. are the billionaires who are making billions
Yeah.
off of prisons.
Yeah.
Because once these prisons empty out of all the minor
Hmm.
cannabis convictions, they're losing tons of money. And
Yeah.
also shut some of these prisons down because they don't have enough prisoners anymore.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
they're paying to keep cannabis illegal. And then that's just one example, but
Right.
all these people who have these ulterior motives.
Hmm.
The only ulterior motive is greed. But
Yes.
not because they actually care about people smoking cannabis.
Right.
They just are making profit off of it. So off
Yeah.
of it illegal. I mean, so they're going to keep pushing the same stuff.
Exactly.
As things do start to change, in Europe, I think one thing that's happening here though is that politicians for the most part, or many of them, are a little bit more looking at the actual science and
Hmm.
the true information behind it.
Hmm.
And of course, the ones who are against it keep screaming the same old stories that we are used to hearing from the U.S. Also, that
Right.
it's going to make more kids smoke, it's going to cause more car accidents, and all
Right.
different things. But what we saw in the U.S. and in Canada is all those things just don't come true. The
Exactly.
health side.
I do think we're on a turning point there because you're absolutely right. The stigma is very strong, but if we as a scientific community can continue the partnerships with the universities and the partnerships with the research clinics and continue doing these trials around cannabinoids and full spectrum extracts, there's plenty of data to start to shift most people's mindset into the direction that this is extremely efficable for anyone. This is something that we need to continue researching because we do have this system internally that likes these compounds. And how do we regulate the compounds and what's needed? And I think that conversation kind of snowballs into the product development side of the industry, right? Because, the US started off extremely, flower and very
Right.
stoner culture, and then started to kind of reel back, okay, we don't want to be a stoner culture, we want this to be more of a medicinal type of product. So it's interesting that we watched that happen, and now here we are in Europe, and I think the same thing is occurring where on the German market, if you go and look at these online pharmacies, 80 to 90% of prescriptions being filled are flower, and
Right.
it's going to continue to be flower with the highest THC percentage. Doesn't matter what it's called, as long as it's high, I can get it. That's great. And then eventually you'll start to see these extract products coming online because you have the people who don't want to smoke. You have the people who don't know how to roll a joint. You have the people who don't know all of these things when it comes to consuming cannabis. They're more traditional. So they're going to look towards the capsules and the tincture oils and things that they can consume that's more discreet and more relatable to what they're used to. So this is,
Right.
I think, the exciting part of the industry.
Yeah, I agree. And if I needed to take cannabis for a medical reason, I wouldn't want to be smoking it because
Right.
being a physician and being a non-smoker, as far as cigarettes go, the last thing I would want to do is start putting smoke into my lungs. Even though
Hmm.
now data is showing that cannabis smoke is not nearly as bad for your lungs as cigarette smoke,
Hmm.
which that surprised me. I figured smoke is smoke,
Right.
but apparently it isn't.
It's distinguished smoke.
Yeah. I mean, that surprised me. I just always assumed just the particulates or whatever, it's going to
Right.
equally bad. But the data so far that they're starting to look at shows maybe that's not the case. But
No,
even
I
so,
agree with that.
still wouldn't want to smoke.
No, I completely agree with that, and it really does make me wonder if this is the separation between the stoner culture that's been kind of historical. And then what's moving forward in the scientific community medically is the difference in consumption there. And I think data is starting to show more and more that rolling joints, smoking traditionally, that's actually the worst way to consume the cannabinoids, because the heat itself is converting and changing the cannabinoids as they're burning. You don't know what chemicals are in the wrapper or the paper that you're using. So there's all sorts of things there that can actually dilute the medicinal benefits,
Yeah.
versus if you're looking at now the future of consumption, you're looking at, okay, I enjoy flower, I like the most natural profile that I possibly can get. Now we have these vaporizers where you can microdose, you can change the temperature setting to only enjoy terpenes or the CBD or the THC,
Mm-hmm.
whichever how that goes. I think now we're starting to get a lot more sophisticated in
Yeah.
how we can consume from a medical perspective and not cause as much damage to the actual product itself.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And vaping, I had to actually read up a while back, a few years back, on how does vaping work, because it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't even clear to me. I just
Mm-hmm.
knew everyone's vaping, but I was like, I didn't really care about it when it was just about friends vaping their tobacco or scented things. But then
Mm-hmm.
when it came to cannabis, I actually was like, wait, so what does it mean? And like you said, different temperatures for different terpenes and for the different compounds, and
Mm-hmm.
it's actually extremely interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but almost a little bit too confusing, I think, for the average user, because it's so many, that's a lot of different information to figure out what exactly you're trying to get out of that strain that you're
Right.
using, that you're
Mm-hmm.
vaping, and what does it mean at what temperature and stuff. But it's still very interesting.
It
Um,
is, and you're right. That is more of an advanced. I would say an advanced consumer would, I
yeah,
think, gravitate more towards a product this way.
yeah,
But one thing that I have a consulting firm that I run with my husband, and we're approached sometimes from folks that just want to ask questions. Just want to understand the industry, or I'm thinking about CBD. What do I do? What does a dose look like? And these are things that I think is very interesting, because people, they want to consume something more natural, but they have no idea where to start. So
right,
again, it comes back to really educating the doctors, because that relationship there between doctor patient, or if you're in a recreational situation, just being able to find information from a reputable source is important. It's very important, and it can really make or break someone's experience if they've never dealt with cannabis before. We usually like to tell people, just like extraction, you need to go low and slow.
yeah,
Everything is low and slow. So you need to make sure that if you are going to consume something, you know what you're consuming first off. You know what the percentage is of cannabinoids. You know what the percentage of THC is, since this is the psychoactive cannabinoid. And
mhm,
then you can tell yourself, okay, I'm going to start off with something modest, maybe a 5 milligram capsule of THC, and see how I feel, and see if that affects, the area that I'm trying to target or what I'm trying to target. And then if it doesn't, then now okay, this was my basis. I'm going to bump it up a bit and maybe try 10. And then you'll find that spot of what works for you, versus some folks, their very first time is to essentially take a full dropper of 75 milligram THC. And then they're on the moon for 3 days and they're just like, I will never touch this again. So it's a very unique experience that I think everyone should apply low and slow. Low and slow will get you there.
yeah. I don't remember who it was, but it was some reporter journalist from back east in the U.S. Went, I think, to Colorado. I think came out to Colorado and ate way too many edibles. Then went back and wrote an article about how horrible edibles are and how horrible cannabis is, because she was so stoned.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone who read it was like, "Oh yeah, you're an idiot."
Right. Do
It's
you
like
even know
going and drinking a
how
fifth
many
of
milligrams you can?
vodka and then saying vodka's horrible. Yeah,
Right.
well, try moderation. Have a cocktail, not a whole bottle.
Exactly.
Like the whole
Exactly.
world laughed at this journalist. Was like, yeah, you're just an idiot. Like,
Yeah.
why badmouth something? Because you're a fool.
Yes. And I think the industry's been plagued with a lot of, the snake oil guys. It's been plagued with a lot of the guys with the fake marketing, with the fake COAs. And I'm just really happy to see, I've been in this industry now for 7, 8 years. And in that short time, it's really evolved into becoming a more legitimate industry to where people can start to really trust the manufacturers and understand what it takes as a manufacturer to even come into the space. And
Yeah.
once you have to go through all those hoops, there's no way that you can cut corners on safety and quality. So I think we're now starting to legitimize ourselves as an industry, not only in the US, but globally. And especially with starting to see markets pop up in LATAM, you have markets popping up in Asia, you have markets popping up in some of the most conservative places that I thought I wouldn't see this until maybe 2050. But this is, I think, really, really great progress into showing how quickly things can change based on the appropriate information being available.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's unfortunate though. As far as regulatory and testing goes, we just saw an article, I think it was about California, where a significant number of the flour or the products that they tested were full of pesticides, which were banned. Because as we've seen across the U.S., a lot of these testing labs are basically pay for play.
Yeah.
Basically you pay and you get a nice COA saying everything's perfect and nice. And then all these labs are just faking them.
Oh, yeah. And then
Um,
you get recalls, mass
yeah,
recalls
and then you
everywhere.
get recalls, and then some of the labs get shut down, some probably don't. Um, but it's just it's completely unacceptable. And I think that's where certainly Germany is like you said at the beginning, being much more stringent on it, and those COAs, the lab reports and things, those are coming from legitimate labs, and
Mm-hmm.
you can you can trust what it says. In the
Mm-hmm.
U.S., probably wouldn't trust any of them at this point.
Oh
Uh,
yeah. In the very beginning of the industry, I feel as if there wasn't as much highlighting of these practices, happening. And this was something that was very close to me in a few roles that I had over in the States, where I was faced with the decision of, okay, am I going to shelve this batch because I know that it's out of spec? Or am I going to go with the COA that my boss secured with their boss with the lab to make sure that this can get sold?
yeah,
No, that doesn't work for me. And that's been essentially my experience individually in this industry. I have been very vocal. I have been someone who is always standing up for the underdog as far as people and how they're treated in cannabis companies. And then also the practices. I'm very open to exposing bad practices. I won't expose companies because I'm a lady, but at the same time, a lot of those companies are exposing themselves throughout literature that you can find what's going on or people getting shut down. So, I've worked for a lot of these guys to where their eyes are just set on how much money can be made in this industry, and essentially they fail so fast. They really do. They come out of the gate and fail so fast. And that's one thing as, a subject matter expert on building out a company and looking at what it takes to actually operate a cannabis facility and sustain the changing patterns in the regulatory environment. You have to spend so much time in the planning phase. And I think
yeah,
a lot of people are very impatient. They're very greedy, like you've said before, and they're just looking to get to that payday as quick as possible. And they sacrifice this very, very important section in managing your project. You have to plan. You have to know the industry and where you're going. You have to know within that region who's my target demographic, what are they buying, what are they interested in, what's their age group, how are they even, related to cannabis. You have to look at the compliance pieces because that is the piece where people neglect to do planning around it, and they realize a year, 2 years into the operation that they're spending more and more money, more and more time trying to get to a level of compliance in which they could have mitigated this in the beginning with having really good planning. So these
right.
are some of the things that in my experience I have seen horrible practices and people just failing fast in the industry versus some of the companies that have really come out on top have been the ones that one have great funding. you got to have great funding. They just do. They have unlimited bankrolls. And then two, they really capitalize on opportunities quickly. And they capitalize on those opportunities quickly by having a model that's working in your state and then copy that in a different state or different country. Instead, some people will start the business, and while they're in startup trying to figure out their market, figure out their product, they're jumping in to acquire or merge with this company over here, which is now a totally different regulatory environment. So now you've got two fires happening at once, and then boom, company shut down, done.
Yeah.
It's interesting that people, in my opinion, something that makes the most common sense is completely neglected when it comes to investing and building these companies.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Yeah. Well, I want to change gears a little bit. I wanted to kind of see how it was for you coming from the U.S. over to Europe. I mean, I think there's a lot of people in the U.S. who are either in the industry, cannabis industry, or maybe not at all in the cannabis industry. But everyone in the U.S. or a lot of people in the U.S. are watching what's happening in Europe, in particular in Germany, are like, "Oh, that's interesting. That sounds exciting," or it'd be kind of nice to get in early, although it's been going on since 2017, but it's really been picking up in the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people are like, "Oh, how do I get in?" How was it for you moving from the U.S. to Germany? How difficult was it to do that and to find a job, to get a visa, to
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff?
That's a great question. And, so my first time coming over was to work as a chief science officer for a hemp based company in Jersey. And so Jersey is an island off the coast of France. They're part of the UK. So this was my first experience with immigrating away from my country. And the way I found the job was, honestly, I really am extremely blessed and surprised at how things come about. But I applied for this role on LinkedIn thinking that it was New Jersey in the United States. So I essentially got lucky, to be honest. I really did. The guy comes on to interview me and he's speaking in this British accent. And I'm like, oh, that's fine. I've met plenty of British folks over here in the States. And he starts asking me, do I know where this island is? And I'm like, yeah, you're in the Northeast. And he's like, no, not quite. And I had to actually find this place. So it was a really interesting, just kind of fell into my lap opportunity. But I would say the immigration process, it definitely is the most time consuming. So you can interview for a job, you can essentially fly over, see, make the decisions like, yes, this is going to be for me. And then when you get back home, that's when the real process starts. And that process, it depends on the country that you're moving into. So my advice is to look up the countries that you're interested in and what the process is to come over as a worker. And you'll be able to say, okay, I can either go into the country with my passport and look for a job on the ground, or I have to do the immigration process completely outside of the country, get approval first, and then come in. This was the case with the UK. With the UK, we needed to do all of the process outside of being in the country. So it took about 3 months, 4 months to get everything in order as far as the work permit, all of the biometric identifications. You had to make sure the passports were up to date, income statements in banks, just all of these different pieces about your life. Who are you and what are you going to contribute when you move over here? Once all of those things are in place, honestly, the application process was very simple with submission. And then you just wait. You essentially wait and you can get further information requests, or they'll just send you an approval, which takes 4 weeks, 6 weeks, depending on your agency. Now, Germany is interesting because Germany, for US citizens, actually wants you to come over. So you can come over and actually apply for a visa to look for work for a year as a US citizen. So there's options there that could make your immigration easier, because if you're on the ground and you find a job, then the company just applies for your work permit and then they can do everything while you're right there on the ground. So it just depends on the country that you're looking to work for.
Yeah, yeah, all very good points. Yeah, and as an American, meaning U.S., USA, but also for Canada, um, it's fairly easy to get into Europe, like you said. I mean, you can come in for 90 days anyway on just a tourist, with basically a tourist visa, but you don't even need a true visa. You just get it when you get here. so people can actually come over and
Mm-hmm.
kind of check things out, go for an interview, travel around a bit, see if it'd be something for them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like you said, though, also it's a lot of paperwork, a lot more than what Americans are used to.
Yep.
Germany, in particular, is very bureaucratic, but all the countries here, they're going to be asking you for things that you're like, what?
Yeah.
Like,
Or
where
things
do
you've
I
never
have
had
this
to submit
information?
before.
You want, you want bank info going back how far? How is this any of your
Right.
business? And all this stuff.
Exactly.
It's very invasive, actually, from a personal point of view. So I think that's something that people coming from North America need to be prepared for.
Yes.
Uh, but in the end, generally, it'll work out.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely if you have an advanced degree
Mm-hmm.
or have other skill sets, then it's going to be easy to come in. A lot of countries have special tax breaks and incentives for people who have uh, certain skill sets or advanced degrees and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. So, like you said, Germany wants people in here. Portugal used to have really low tax rate for skilled individuals coming in. I heard they've gotten rid of that, although I didn't
Mm-hmm.
verify that, but I heard that from someone not too long ago. But
Mm-hmm.
the point being, a lot of countries in Europe really do want uh, people to come in because the population growth isn't high enough. So they need them.
Right.
And so they'd love to have people coming in with advanced degrees who can make a good living and contribute a lot to the economy versus coming in and then being a burden on the government.
Right.
And that's
Right.
exactly what they're actually trying to make sure it doesn't happen. That's why they're looking at bank accounts and
Exactly, exactly.
history
They
and
want to
all.
make sure you can sustain yourself. And
Yeah.
one thing too that I noticed when I was searching for jobs in Europe is one of the platforms I used the most was LinkedIn. LinkedIn has really monopolized the job search platform. And for me, when I was looking, I did notice it's if you're located in an IP address that's over in the United States, then you're going to get potential job opportunities that are tailored around your region. And I didn't know this until I actually moved over here because I was telling colleagues and friends, like, oh, there's plenty of jobs on the cannabis circuit here in Europe. There's some people in Denmark, people in Spain, blah, blah, blah. And all of them kept telling me, we don't see this. I don't see any of these opportunities. So I would say, it really depends on where you are and what platform you're using to find the jobs, because it is quite difficult to find those postings if they're not posted in your area. So my suggestion would be to look up some of the licenses and the producers that are working in Europe, some of the companies, and then go directly to those company sites and look for careers. Because if not, you can get lost in a lot of sales positions, telemarketing positions for like CBD and things like that, that essentially just get fed to the algorithm on that side of the world. But I
Yeah.
found that to be extremely interesting that we were seeing two totally different things.
Well, that's actually why one of the reasons behind EUCannaJobs. So the EUCannaJobs platform has jobs listed all over Europe, and so someone can go there without really knowing about who are the companies in Europe, and there are 50 to 100 jobs at any point posted on EUCannaJobs, and then we also do recruiting for other positions that aren't listed on there, but that allows people from all over the world to come and look at
Yeah.
one platform and see jobs all over Europe. Versus if you do use LinkedIn, like you said, it's going
Mm-hmm.
to filter out based on where you are. Or
Mm-hmm.
if you go to Indeed, it's going to send you back to your own country. Or you have to go to
Yeah,
Indeed.de to look for jobs in Germany. Then, but if
sure.
you want to look for jobs in France, then you have to go to Indeed.fr or whatever. I'm assuming it's FR. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. Et cetera. Whereas at EU Canada Jobs, it's just going to show you what's available, and then you
Which
can.
is so helpful because, like you said, a lot of people don't know Indeed.de. They don't know what the last digits would be for Malta. They don't have this information. So I agree. That is a huge resource to be able to come to a one-stop shop and say, you know what? I'm looking to make a change. I want to move into Europe, into the space. It's burgeoning. This is a good opportunity. If they come to the EU Canada Jobs platform, then like you said, 50 to 100 opportunities right there that are
Right.
all within Europe, and you can essentially pick and then start to look, okay, now I can see that EUCannaJobs has multiple ones in Germany. I'm going to look at what are the requirements as a worker to come into Germany. So yeah,
Right.
that makes total sense.
Yep. And and for people who are listening, if someone has a lot of experience in cannabis or an advanced degree, they can also send us an email through our through the platform, through the website, and we can look at things directly with individuals and see if they're good for a candidate for recruiting. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where we can then also talk them through part of the process for how you do get into Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Companies help with that too. If someone's very qualified, the company wants them, then the company's going to take care of a lot of that for them.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, you have to dig up all your documents and everything back home,
Mm-hmm.
but usually the company will have an attorney or hook you up with someone who can help with that whole process too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not like you're left floating, totally confused, trying to figure out
Absolutely.
another country's bureaucracy, which can be maddening. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah. So let me see. What we've kind of gone around a lot of different things.
I know, right? We've touched on a lot of things today.
Well, how long have you been in Germany now?
So I came over to Germany. So I first came into the UK in 2021. And
Hmm.
then I started to do consulting with my firm, with my husband for a couple of years full time, so that we can kind of figure out, to be honest, where we wanted to be in Europe.
Hmm.
So we were able to kind of live all over. And then I brought myself down here to Germany in February. So I've
Oh,
been here a little over a year, almost a year and a half.
nice. How are you liking it?
I love it, to be honest. That's one thing as an American coming over into Europe, it can be a huge culture shock the very first time that you come over. And
Mhm.
in the workplace, I'm noticing it's a culture shock.
Yeah.
Dealing with, having a European staff, and things are just a little bit more lackadaisical, and people actually take their holiday time, and just different things like this I had to learn about. But I would say, like, the quality of life here is just so different. It's so different and completely worth it. And if you have, like myself, I have small kids, I'm raising a family, it's a safe place here in Germany. And I mean, it's lovely. It's absolutely lovely here. The language is hard, language is difficult.
Yeah, German is definitely a hard language to learn. And it's interesting. I live in Berlin, and so many people just speak English that a lot of my non-German friends in Berlin find it difficult to learn German in Berlin because everyone
Ah,
speaks
yeah,
English, and they're like, "Where am I supposed to learn German here in Berlin?" So
exactly.
yeah,
That's not as big of an issue here. I've heard this about the major cities, and I'm here in Saarland, which the Saarland is very small.
yeah,
And honestly, where we live is very tiny. We have a very small little village outside of Saarbrücken. So for me, it's all German. We're surrounded by mostly older Germans, so they don't use a lot of English at all, if they even remember it, because a lot of them only got English in high school and they don't use it in a daily basis. So for us, we're surrounded by it. So we're forced to have to learn the language to get by and to speak to neighbors. And it's just a wonderful experience, I think, for our family.
yeah. I'm sure. I mean, it's great for kids, definitely.
It's great.
But yeah, like you mentioned, quality of life, it's so much better, and Americans have no concept of quality of life, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like you said, everyone takes vacation,
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
it's some kind of weird, bizarre thing for people to
Yep.
take vacation. And
I know.
here, even a waiter or or a
Mm-hmm.
janitor, and nothing wrong with those jobs, but people who are on the lower end of the pay scale, they
Mm-hmm.
go on vacation a couple of times a
Mm-hmm.
year. A lot of times
Yep.
on international trips to Asia or somewhere else,
Mm-hmm.
which people who are middle class in the U.S. are like, I don't have the money or time to do that.
Exactly.
Oh, the waiter
Exactly.
doing that in Germany is like, that's called quality of life. You
Oh
know,
yeah. Oh yeah. It's
exactly
completely
what it
different
is.
here.
Yeah.
Completely different. And it's funny because you're absolutely right. When people go on vacation here, they actually are on vacation. Companies
Mhm.
will respect their time away from the office, versus in America. I know plenty of times where I was on vacation or evening or weekends, where I had bosses calling me or emails coming through that were urgent and needed to be answered right away, and just all of these different things. I remember having my son and being a new mom and having this breastfeeding relationship I was trying to set up and spending this quality time with my child. And I couldn't even really do that because
Yeah.
half of the time I had one kid in the arm and my hand was over here typing on a laptop trying to get back to bosses. So
Right.
it's very interesting, the dynamic and the respect. I think that's very common over here in the companies. And that culture, for me specifically, I will tell anyone that's making the shift, don't just look at the salary. Salaries are going to be different from America to Europe, period. But you're going to get a much more comprehensive package. I mean, it's very common in Germany to have an average of, what is it, 24, 25 days a year for vacation. I mean,
Yeah.
this is huge.
Or more even. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, and like you said, I mean, definitely, and I've had this conversations many times with people that we're recruiting over from the U.S. because, if someone's looking for someone with a lot of experience in cannabis, a lot of times we have to bring those look in the U.S. Not that you
Mhm.
can't find it in Europe, but a lot more
Yeah.
candidates like in the U.S. And, it's a conversation I always have to have right at the beginning is, your salary is going to be much less here. You're going to
Hmm.
get a lot more for it, you know.
Hmm.
You know, people here can make 36 grand a year and then they retire at 65 and can live off that retirement.
Yep.
If you're making 36 grand a year in the US, first of all, you're probably homeless
Yep.
and you're certainly not going to be able to retire, you know?
Absolutely.
So,
100%.
I mean, people in the US, once again, quality of life and just, uh, they just don't understand that,
Hmm.
that, or then they also talk about, well, taxes are more here. Taxes are slightly higher here, but not that much more. And
I'm glad you brought this up because it's a constant conversation, I think, with Americans versus Europeans. And yes, we pay higher taxes than the bracket we would have been in back home. However, if I'm sick, if I'm in the hospital, or if I'm going to the doctor's office, or if I'm going to pick up prescriptions, or if I need an ambulance, these are covered from the taxes that I'm paying. I'm not expected to have a copay. I'm not expected to have this bill come in the mail a month later with thousands of dollars paying the hospital, the Krankenwagen, the doctors, the people feeding you. It's insane to me. But when you try to explain it, most people are just looking at that number. They're looking at, well,
right,
in the States, I pay 23%. So if you're paying 33%, that's way too high, but you're getting so much more. And then on
right.
top of that, as a parent, I'm looking at the fact that my children have the opportunity to have post-secondary education covered through the tax system. That's huge. That right there is for two children, 50 to 100 grand, depending on what they're going to school for.
Oh, more than that. I mean, 50 grand a year
Yes.
per per kid, you know?
This is a while since I've been in school, so apparently I'm looking at things from back then.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're
Yeah. I mean,
right.
like you said, the health insurance stuff in the US is insane. So you pay a ton of money each month for your insurance, and then your company's paying a bunch. So per, someone, like yourself, a family of four, you're probably
Mm-hmm.
paying 1,500 a month in insurance. Your company's paying
Yep.
1,500 a month. And then if you have to use it, first 5 grand comes out of your pocket, and then after that,
Yep.
you still pay 40%. So if you're in the
Exactly.
hospital for an appendicitis, you get an $80,000 bill, and you're supposed to pay 30 grand
Yeah. And that's
after
just,
paying
it's not
1,500 a
sustainable.
month.
It's
It's
not
like,
sustainable. It's
yeah,
not
yeah,
sustainable. I can just imagine this is why the cannabis industry is so important because we're offering an alternative for the mental health problems that are happening. We have a huge mental health crisis amongst young people in America, amongst young adults in America, and amongst the older population. Literally everyone are having
yeah,
issues. And this is something that, we as a community have to continue pushing this awareness and pushing the work that we're doing so that all of these people can at least have something at the end of the day. If it's not 30 days vacation, if it's not, being able to have a lot of benefits in their tax system, at least it's being able to relax and not have a health ailment that's on top of all this other stuff, really coming down on you. So this is, I think, really important to the conversation is what we're doing every day is hopefully affecting someone's life in a positive way to where they can wake up
Yeah,
essentially and really look for those opportunities because they are out here. And
yeah,
thanks to companies like yours and thanks to people like yourself, Americans are able to realize some of these opportunities in other areas.
yeah, absolutely. And that's why I said, always happy to have people reach out and just chat with us, and I'll be honest with them and say, oh, your background, I don't know that you'll be able to get a job here. Maybe you need further education or something
Mhm.
so that you are able to easily get into Europe.
Mhm.
Or I'll say, looks great. Let's see, keep an eye out for you.
Yeah.
Um, unfortunately, not everyone has a great resume already, but that's something that we build over time and over life. So even if you're not a great candidate today, it doesn't mean you won't be in a year or two or three or four.
Mhm. Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
and it's never too late in life to make those changes. Just about, I mean, if
Oh,
you're 70, it
absolutely.
might be too late to be making big changes. Who knows?
Yeah.
For most people, it's usually not too late to start looking at different things. I mean, I stopped being a doctor, 8 years ago or something, and started a couple of different new things, and now I'm in the cannabis industry for a while now, and I'll remain here for a while. But who knows? This might not be my last adventure or
There you
industry.
go.
Um, I mean, I think it's actually kind of sad that the world overall, not just in the U.S. but everywhere in the world, everyone's stuck in this idea that you have to just choose your career when you're in high school, and that's what you do the rest of your life
Right.
until you retire or die. It's
Right.
like, who wants to do the same thing for 50 years?
Yeah. I hear
Why
you on that.
I think we should normalize that. Um, you know, finding new careers, finding things to keep you interested in life, I think is a good thing.
I
um,
agree.
that's, of course, when you have kids and stuff, that makes it more difficult, and you need to be a little bit more. There's a little bit more planning involved,
Mhm.
and
But it's not
looking.
impossible. But it's not impossible. I'm
Yeah.
happy you mentioned that because when we moved over here, we had a home, we had two vehicles, we had the children in school, and we decided to change our entire life. We started homeschooling the kids. My husband decided to stay home and homeschool them and run our consulting firm. And then I was essentially in the field working. And then we sold our house, and then we sold all of our furniture, and we sold all of the cars. And we decided, okay, let's just make the jump, and we did. And like you said, when you have kids, it can be a little more difficult and you have to plan and think through those risks that you're taking. But I would say the way we took those risks and changed our lives for our children, they're getting a totally different experience than what I would have had at 7 or 9, or what we could have, really given them back home in America. We wouldn't have been able to give them what we're giving them now, which is culture and a new language and the opportunity to travel to multiple countries. I mean, Germany has not 8, 9 neighboring countries, that you can easily just pop up to. So it's amazing. It's a really good opportunity, I think.
Yeah, and traveling. I've always said traveling is one of the best teachers. Um, if you grow up traveling to other countries, seeing other cultures, seeing people speaking different languages, seeing people just being different, it's
Hmm.
hard to be closed-minded and racist
Yes.
later,
Hmm.
because you're either just more open to there's different kinds of people. Not everyone's the same.
Exactly. Yeah,
That's
exactly.
normal then. And
Yeah.
I think the U.S. is very homogenous, even though we've got, of course, we've got black and white and Latino, and then other people from other countries,
Hmm.
but it's still a very homogenous place
Hmm.
in the end. Um, and a lot of Americans are not very welcoming to foreigners.
Yeah.
And that's not just white Americans; it's all types of Americans and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So
Oh, yeah.
think just by traveling, seeing other cultures, it's the best teaching you can give your children. So,
Oh, it really is. Yeah.
you know,
No, I completely agree.
We're almost at an hour. It goes by fast.
It does.
Do you want to give a little shout out about what you and your husband are doing and how people can reach out to you and what kind of
Sure.
things you guys can help people with?
Absolutely. So we run a consulting firm. Our company name is Victus Consulting Ventures. And you can find us at www.victus-cv.com. That's victus-cv.com. Or you can look me up or my husband, Christopher Ratliff, on LinkedIn. We're happy to answer questions regarding startup projects. So we essentially help people in the smaller projects if they just want to ask some questions, if they need help with SOPs, if they need help understanding a market and the compliance requirements. We offer help in those areas, but we also work with very large projects. For instance, one of our clients was a startup in the UK, and they hired us on whenever it was time to design the facility, to think about GMP considerations within that design and the equipment for throughput, etc. So we have a lot of experience. We have a very open wealth of knowledge when it comes to seed to sale in the industry. And we're just happy to partner with people to help them in their endeavors within this industry, because as I've said with Andy today, that it's so important for us to continue to push the scientific efforts in this industry forward so that we can have a more legitimized industry and a more commoditized product across the globe. So yeah, that's a little bit about us and what we do. Feel free to reach out anytime.
Great, great. Well, thanks, Alisia, for joining me today. It was great talking again. I'm sure we'll be staying in touch as we have been anyway. And of course, if you need anything from me anytime, reach out. But you already knew that. But thank you everyone for tuning in to this episode of EUCannaJobs Potcast. We hope you enjoyed our conversation with Alisia Ratliff. You can, like she said, you can look her up on LinkedIn if you have any questions for her. I think her experience and success coming from the U.S. to Europe is an inspiration really for anyone wanting to cross the pond and join the industry over here as it's beginning to explode. So, don't hesitate to follow that lead. Be sure to visit our website also, EUCannaJobs.com, for more information about job opportunities or other resources in the cannabis industry, and stay connected with us for more updates, interviews, industry news, and also follow us on LinkedIn. And you can also reach out to me on LinkedIn also for other updates. And actually, if people want to stay tuned, at the end of this podcast, we'll also list a couple of current jobs that we're trying to fill. So, feel free to take a look at those. So until next time, I'm Andy Mannsfeld, wishing you a great day ahead. Stay informed, stay connected, and stay up to date on what's happening in the cannabis industry. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.